Welcome to the fifth and final segment of the sales framework for non-sales professionals. If you've been with me through the first 3 or 4 episodes, you know we've covered a lot. The mental game, fact-finding, and the demonstration phase. Each of these is critical, but today we're going deeper, focusing on the internal game. Because here's the truth. In sales, you have to master the internal game before you can hope to win the external one. Much like leadership. And when I say win, I don't mean beating the prospect. Sales done right is a win-win. Your role is to help the prospect achieve what they desire. But if you haven't done the internal work, if you're driven by your own unmet needs, like closing more deals or chasing success, it's much harder to stay focused on the prospect. Their needs will fade into the background. When you're operating from a place of hunger, that's what happens. So today, I'll show you how to flip that script. We'll start by looking at high-performance habits and cognitive actions that you can cultivate during each major sales phase of the framework: pre-call, fact-finding, and demonstration. Now, this part of the conversation isn't about sales tactics. It's about mental preparation and resilience. How do you stay grounded, confident, and focused when the outcome is uncertain? How do you process and manage your own emotions in real time so you can remain present with your prospect? The answer lies in building the right habits. This isn't just a motivational talk. We're talking neuroscience, specifically neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself. The brain we're born with is not the brain we have to die with. The good news, you can change. The challenge, it is a process and it takes time. But we're talking time that's measured in weeks, maybe months, not years. It's a process. You don't wake up tomorrow with new habits, but you do wake up with the opportunity to take the next step. After we cover these cognitive actions, I'll share a set of well-accepted success practices, why they work, and how you can accelerate adoption of these practices. I call them practices, not principles, for a reason. Practices aren't guaranteed to work every time, and that's okay. In fact, many things we rely on, like prescription medications, supplements, routines, they aren't effective 100% of the time either. In fact, oftentimes a prescription medication doesn't perform much better than a placebo. Yet, people can stake their life on it. The point is to stay committed to the process. When you combine these practices with the right habits, you stack the odds in your favor. It's also helpful to remember that how you develop muscle memory. For example, focusing on one aspect of the entire process to build the skills necessary that comprise the entire capability. Here's the key. The practices that work to form muscle memory, they work for habits. Because it isn't muscle memory, it's actually nervous system memory. Think about it. The same nervous system that is responsible for your habits of thought, mindset, and how you respond to challenges and threats. That can be learned the same way that you teach your muscles to perform in a certain way. I'll wrap up with mindset, which is an important and often underestimated tool in the toolbox. Not so much that it's overlooked, but too often people think that they have a growth mindset because they actually do in one area. But that belief can make them oblivious to the fact their mindset is fixed in many other related and important areas. Aligned with this perspective, I'll wrap up with the Stockdale paradox. Now, some of you may be familiar with this. It was introduced by Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great. No sugarcoating, no false optimism, just determination paired with clear-eyed pragmatism. But I will talk about it in the context of developing the habit to apply it when it matters most. As a reminder, this series was designed for business owners and executives. The principles also work for people who are formerly in a sales role, but the objective is to empower leaders who have to wear many hats and possibly step into a proven sales framework with just a moment's notice. Next week, I'll pick up where I left off a little over a month ago, and that is with the overview of dynamic leadership and how you can integrate it as the preferred leadership style in your organization as you plan to grow and scale. Just like the sales framework is based on how prospects and clients like to buy, dynamic leadership is based on how people want to be led and that includes fostering an environment that is rich in intrinsic motivation. Dynamic leadership is the formula for a high-performance organization. But first, a quick review of the sales framework episodes. I encourage you to watch each of the prior recordings if you haven't done so, and you can find those in my events section for the next 2 weeks. After that, you'll find them in the Dynamic Leadership Library, and that link is in the description with this event. So last few weeks, we started with the pre-call, and that was a little bit of mindset. We talked about your state, what state you're in, the physiology and how important that is, and how physiology can actually send you into a fight or flight or prepare you for fight or flight, which sort of is like on the precipice of stress, of being a stressor. And we talked about energy, having positive energy, but positive energy could be high and it can be low. The point is you don't want negative energy. Too often people drop into a low, what should be low positive energy, but they don't have the distinction, and then they have that low positive energy, but it's like negative energy instead. And then we had mindset, and we pull it together with priming. We're always being primed. It makes sense to prime yourself rather than being primed by the environment. Some of it is unintentional, some of it's intentional. I mean, every good marketer understands the power of priming, and in their ad copy, and even the context of where the copy is found has a priming influence on us. So it makes sense to prime ourselves, and that way we can perform, we have the best option to perform at our. So we went from pre-call, which was the mindset, and then we went into a pre-qualify step. And this is really just to confirm that, yes, this person is in market, that they are a good prospect. And you can do this in part with having an application that they fill out when they book the call. And a lot of this depends on how the call comes in. If you're prospecting yourself, that's one thing. If you've got somebody prospecting for you, etc., you have to look at how the leads are coming in. But the point is, before I go into an hour presentation on Zoom, I want to make sure that we're aligned on a few things. And one of those is that they are in market, and that this makes sense for them. I don't want to waste their time. I don't want to waste mine. But the other thing is, the more you can remove some of those non-sales out of the mix on the way to the close, you're able to put more of your energy and emotion into that close, because you know that you've already moved through this. You're down to like a closing ratio of 60, 70, 80% rather than 20%. And that's based on that pre-qualify step. And this is not about qualifying yes or no. It's a now or later. So you're qualifying them in that, do we continue today, or do we pick this up? Do we reschedule next week? Let's say that they're in a bad situation time-wise, or maybe they're just not in market yet. Maybe there's some event that has to happen. Maybe it's a purchasing cycle that has to happen. Then we did 2 sets of fact-finding. We talked about, in the fact-finding, we talked about open-ended questions, either-or questions, and then yes questions. And they blend together. They sort of overlap, because in the early part of rapport, you're using open-ended questions, and those open-ended questions lead right into fact-finding, where you still may be using open-ended, but then you go into some either-or. And then while you're in those either-or questions, especially in the second stage of fact-finding, and I talked about the first stage being more of the public persona, the things that are widely known that this person shares freely in a public setting, and then the private persona, where it's a little bit more personal. We're leaving alone the secret persona. So those two stages of fact-finding, and in rapport, you earn the right to do the first stage of fact-finding. In the first stage of fact-finding, you earn the right to go into the second stage of fact-finding. You earn that right by listening and responding, acknowledging, making sure you're taking the time. This is not about a quicker affirmation of what they've said and jump right into another question. You actually have to listen and be there. You have to be patient. And then we went from the second stage of fact-finding, which is really going deeper. I talked about asking the question why 5 times, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times. But the more you can ask the question why, you get beyond their automatic response. That's how you get into that private persona. I mentioned that oftentimes people are accustomed to answering why once or twice. But you'll get to a point, and it's the third or fourth time often, sometimes by the second, and you'll see their eyes maybe go side to side, or they'll flesh a little bit. Maybe you'll see them, just like a little move that happens. Sensory acuity, you start picking up on it more and more. But this happens when you've gone beyond their subconscious automatic responses, and now you're into them consciously thinking. You'll see them look up or what have you. They'll take more time to answer because now you're in the conscious mind, and that's where you want to be. You want to get beyond the automatic responses that are coming out of the subconscious, because these are associations. They're not even really present from one perspective. They're associations that have fired before, and they're just firing. But as you get into that conscious mind, into speaking to the conscious, now you can tap into the heart, you can tap into the purpose. And this is important because sales are made based on emotion, not logic. You're going to justify them with logic. So this is not about tricking somebody, but the sale is actually made from an emotional standpoint because the reason that they're in market, and I talked about looking at how the lead generation to see how they came about as a prospect to begin with. And the short version is some headline caught their attention. Why did it catch their attention? Because it's important to them. What's that connection? The reticular activating system filters through what's important now. That's why when you set goals, serendipity seems to show up. The objects of the serendipity were there. It's just that when you set the goal, your reticular activating system becomes aware of it. You often hear the example, you buy a silver car and all of a sudden you see all these silver cars. You didn't see them before you bought it, but your reticular activating system is attuned to it now. That headline that caught their attention is why they're talking to you in the first place, generally speaking, and you want to tap back into that. So that's important to them. Let's say it's important to them most of the time, but they may not be thinking about it right now. So one of the things we're doing in the sales process is helping them remember that thing that's important. Now, I should point out that this framework, as I said in the introduction, is for non-sales professionals, targeted for C-suite executives, CEOs, coaches works as well. If you're wearing multiple hats or you're not in a sales role, a person in a formal sales role may not have the luxury to put off a prospect, to pre-qualify them. They may not have the luxury of saying, you know what, this doesn't sound like it's a good match right now. Why don't we plan on getting together in a couple of months? That may not be available to a person in a formal sales role. The other thing that happens in my mind for a business owner is that it's important for them to preserve the relationship. So preserving the relationship may take a higher priority than making the sale right now. And certainly a person may not be a buyer today, but they may be a buyer in a year from now or the 2 years. They also can be a source of referrals and even centers of influence, even though they never become a customer. So a business owner has a different lens through which they're looking than a person in a formal sales role. That's the only reason why I say it's not really geared for the sales professional, because I do create these off-ramps where we can, postpone that sales conversation. And the second off-ramp, so the first one obviously was in the confirmation step before fact-finding. The second one is the transition into the demonstration. I call it a demonstration because I want to involve the person in it. I want them to feel like they're experiencing whatever it is that we've talked about, and we're going to be using their words. We're using their words from the fact finding, but this transition is very similar to the first one. I don't want to do a presentation until the person is in a position where they could make a buying decision. Why? Because in that demonstration, I'm going to get them involved emotionally, and it's very difficult to get that place again after this time. Why? Because a person is not going to sit through a presentation or a demonstration again. They've already done it. Why would they do it again? They don't understand the connection that I'm making right now with the emotion, but a person does not want to sit through a presentation again. I call it presentation, demonstration. They don't want to sit through that again because they've already done it. So why spill my candy in the lobby? I want to wait. And a good example, if you're in a nonprofit organization and you're talking to somebody, you're doing some fundraising, but they make a strategic decision once a year or twice a year around who they're going to give money to, and that time is 6 or 7 months off, I may not want to talk to them now. I may want to put that off closer. Or let's say you're, selling commercial insurance and their current policy doesn't renew, for 7 or 8 months down the road. Perhaps you talk to them closer to that time. With anything, vehicles, anything that has a buying cycle, you want to, and that's just one example. The other example is that they've got other things on their plate. Maybe they just bit off too much and they're trying to chew it. They're not ready to take on something new. Yes, they may be interested in hearing about it, but if we've done the fact-finding job right, they know enough about what you're offering. What they don't know is the price, and you can tell them, hey, the offers change. We adjust the offers based on what we're seeing in the marketplace, based on what the needs are, and also what our existing clients are asking for. We may take away offers and add some offers. So I don't want to give a price now because it could change. But you have the essence of what we could do. If you think that this is valuable for us, I suggest we set a follow-up and, meet X amount of time down the road. Just some examples, but that's that transition. And then we get into the demonstration. I've already alluded to what the demonstration is. It's a presentation, but I use it as a demonstration. I use the word demonstration because I want to involve them. And then it's a recommendation. It fits better with the recommendation. I don't go presentation close. It's presentation recommendation. And the recommendation is like a close. It's really their first opportunity to buy. But saying no to the recommendation, it gives them a way to say no without saying no. It's for the ones who want to buy, the recommendation, like I said, is an easy way for them to buy. The ones who are not ready to buy, it's an easy way for them to say they want to think about it or what have you. And I'd rather do that and then deal with the objection rather than have them say no and then go back into handling an objection. For salespeople, they're going to have their own way of doing it, and it may differ, it may be the same. This is based on how people like to buy, and you're there shoulder to shoulder figuratively. Even if you're on a Zoom call, you can imagine yourself and using wording as though you're shoulder to shoulder, because that's how people, you're then putting in a situation where they're making a decision and you're there as sort of an advisor. And then today we're going to talk about mastering the inner game. So originally when I first did this, I was only going to do the pre-call, which is the inner game, the first and second fact-finding, and then the third one being demonstration. But I added this fifth one because the inner game is so important. And especially if people are not accustomed to selling. Right now, we're probably seeing more and more people move into selling who are relying on online sales completely, just because of with artificial intelligence being able to spit out ads so much. We're being inundated with ads. It was already bad. We were already at 6,000 or 7,000 ad stimuli a day. Most of you are not even seeing because they're not being filtered through to your conscious. But that's only going to grow. And so at some point, companies may decide, coaches may decide that their better option is to start selling at least partially. And I call it it's like a hybrid. We're in a hybrid now where maybe use automation to get them on the call, but then you're doing the sale face-to-face on Zoom or something like that. What I want to do first is talk about some of the high gain mindset type activities you can engage in during the sales, the 3 steps. And I call it 3 steps. Remember, it's 4 steps. It's the pre-call, fact-finding 1, which includes the pre-qualification, fact-finding 2, which includes the transition into the demonstration, and then the demonstration itself, and then handling objections is part of that. We talked about using a roadmap. And in that roadmap, I'll just break it into the 3 parts. So this is one section of the road. This is the pre-call. This is where I say fill up the tank. We don't have the opportunity to get things back on track in a sales call. If you miss, like they say, the first impression is a lasting impression. We don't always get a chance to make a second impression. So we need to come to this with the deck stacked in our favor. So I say fill the tank. And you fill the tank with things that help you with the mindset. We talked last time about state. I did a diamond, and we did state, physiology, energy, mindset, and then we put priming in the middle. And I said priming is always at play, and if we're not careful, we could get primed into a state that we don't want to be in. We can get primed into a physiology, and you can go back and look at those. But this was important, and so then we're talking about filling the tank. We can do drills. I mentioned in the introduction, drills is how we develop muscle memory. So we can do drills with our mind. We do drills with speaking. We can have thoughts and just keep doing drills as deep practice, the same way you would do drills on the tennis court, or if you're playing basketball, whatever that drill, whatever that sport might be. Another one is implementation intentions. Implementation intentions, that's mental rehearsal. You're saying that when this happens, I'm going to do that. We're always faced with circumstances that we weren't prepared for. Some of them are unknown, but for the ones that we weren't prepared for or that are known, we can have an implementation intention that's already rehearsed. And the reason this is so powerful is because if you think about a stimulus, and people talk about it as stimulus response, and in here is about 1/4 of a second, 250 milliseconds. But I would say that stimulus response is not stimulus response, it's stimulus reaction. And then in another 250 to 500 milliseconds, we have a response. Now, the convenient thing is to allow the reaction to equal the response. It's convenient because the subconscious processes at 11 million bits per second, and it's super fast. And the conscious, 50 bits. So why engage the conscious mind when the subconscious has already done the work, especially if the person is thinking of the subconscious as actually thinking. It's not thinking, it's associations. By definition, associations are mostly from the past. That's how they got there. And we could get some associations by rehearsal or by visualization, but most associations are from the past. So we're reacting to new situations based on what worked or might have worked or what we thought worked in the past. And too many times it didn't even work in the past. We just keep repeating it because the intensity of that belief is so strong that we keep trying to make it work. And then even after response, we still have the choice/decision. And I would say those are different. If I'm faced with two things and I have to pick one, that's a choice, right? Is it big or little? Which one do I want? The big one. The thinking is done for me. The work is done for me. But when I have to decide, that means a whole nother level of conscious thinking. And deciding means I've got to solve a problem. The problem is I don't understand which decision, which one to choose. And that starts with clearly define the problem. And so this is a long way of saying that in about 3/4 of a second, we probably have most of our mistakes happen in that 3/4 of a second space. We could drastically cut down our mistakes by putting a pause in between reaction and response and seeing the two as different, and then having the response and making a conscious decision. Is this a choice or is it a decision? And if it's a decision, I have to delay it even more. A choice I can do real time, a decision I have to put it off because now I have to clearly define the problem, etc. However, I would say that when you learn to make the distinction between the subconscious and the conscious real time, your conscious mind can actually use the subconscious as a database. It's about moving the conscious back above being in charge, so it leverages the subconscious for automaticity instead of the automaticity driving us. So that's why you rehearse the implementation intentions. Quick review, the implementation intention steps in here, and it says, when this happens, I'm going to do this. So now the reaction, because the subconscious is processing so quickly, not only does it look at what it's reacted within the past, but it also looks at the implementation intentions and it gives you the proper response. Mental contrasting. And mental contrasting, it's kind of interesting. Some people do this naturally. Mental contrasting is essentially saying that, or being able to keep the two things in mind at one time, that this is going to be hard, but I can also prevail. If you go too far with mental contrasting, if you go to the extreme, then you're focusing on what's hard about it, and then that could lead to focusing on the gap. And if we focus on the gap, we get more of the gap. Imagine a tiger chasing you, which is what the subconscious looks at most threats as, is the tiger on the Serengeti. That tiger is chasing you. You can look forward at where you're going and run that way, and you'll be faster than if you turn around looking at the tiger. If you turn around and look at the tiger, not only are you looking at the threat, the danger, but you're also noticing the gap. And maybe the gap is getting smaller, and now you focus on the gap and how it's getting smaller, and you just focus more and more and more on that. So mental contrasting is to recognize that the tiger is there, that it's danger, but also recognizing that you have the skills and ability to stay looking forward. And it goes in with implementation intentions, but it keeps you from thinking things are going to be too easy. Here's what happens if you don't use some form of mental contrasting. We set out there to do this thing, and we live in a pass-fail world, and we think in our mind, and we think that if I don't get it right the first time, I'm not going to be able to do it. Well, imagine the kids in the skate park practicing tricks. Imagine if they had that mentality, they'd never be able to do the trick. Sometimes they're practicing for weeks and weeks before they actually see progress. They can hit those plateaus. And we have to think of it like that, especially in VUCA with volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. This VUCA world that's only going to get more so, we have to be willing to have some grace and go through a learning process. And then we have mindset. And mindset, Carol Dweck's book on this topic, Growth Mindset, is excellent. But just the power of yet. Just by saying the word yet. If you are in the habit of saying, I can't do that, you can start working on that by saying yet. Just the word yet can flip us into a growth mindset. The other thing is to recognize where you have a fixed mindset. Too often, people think they have a growth mindset and they actually have a fixed mindset, and they don't realize it. Then the last one I want to mention on this is pay attention to I don't want power. And, we're talking about selling. Let's say that as a kid, this person, 5 years old, experienced maybe their parent lambasting a salesperson, and they're just going off the deep end about how they don't like salespeople. The 5-year-old kid, because the conditioning happens from 0 to 7. All those associations I was talking about, the majority of them happen from 0 to 7. They get tweaked and adjusted into personality from about 8 to 19, and then from 20 to 27 or so, I call it operational. They get operationalized because the 20 billion neurons in the prefrontal cortex, they finish formulating, and then they're using that conditioning to formulate. And that's how by age 35, 95% of our lives is by habit, because it's all of that conditioning from 0 to 7, tweaked in the teens and solidified or operationalized in the 20s. And with the prefrontal cortex is where we get our executive functions. What's interesting is willpower and I don't want power are in the prefrontal cortex. So I don't want power is really a self-control mechanism. And it makes sense, right? At 18 years old, a lot of people don't have much self-control. That self-control mechanism also can become the I don't want power. So that 5-year-old kid who locks in that salespeople are bad because what they observed their parent doing, and now they want to sell, but they've got this self-control mechanism that says, no, salespeople are bad. I don't want, and they don't realize it. And they're taking training, they're going to classes, they're trying to sell, and each time they're like, it's like fighting uphill, they're fighting against themselves, they're stressed out, they just can't get it done. And it could be because the I don't want power is acting as a self-control mechanism. Now, why is that important? The I don't want power, remember, when you think of the subconscious, think of it as, it looks at threats as the Serengeti tiger. So if I don't want to do something, that something is treated just like a Serengeti tiger. I don't want to go there because I could die from the tiger. So if it's I don't want to sell, avoidance of selling is as strong as life and death. And this is why when you push against it, it can push back. No matter how hard you push against it, it's always going to find more energy to push back because it's about survival. It's life and death. So it's not going to sit back and let you plow through and go selling. You're going to have to reconcile that I don't want power. And it's easy to do. You just have to recognize that it's there, where it's coming from. And I say easy to do. You can do it in a session, just some journaling. Easier with a coach because the coach will spot it. It may take you years to spot the I don't want power, but the coach spots it right away because it's inconsistent. You're saying I want to do this, and then you have these I don't wants. Then we have the fact-finding part. And the fact-finding part, we've got to be patient for obvious reasons because we're asking them questions. And remember, this is the first time that they've been in a sales presentation with you. it may be your 100th sales presentation. It's not always with the same person, but you ask the same kind of questions. And eventually you start to see this pattern emerge. And you have to work at not jumping the gun and stepping on their thinking time just because you know where the answers are coming from. It gets to the point where you already know 60, 70, 80% of the answers just from using thin slicing. You already have seen who this person is, and there will be some nuances you have to stay open to, but you've got to be patient because part of this emotional part is them getting wrapped into it, and it takes them time. So just, patience is a big one. You have to have a service mentality. You're there as a service. And I would say if you can get into a state of curiosity, because you want to stay curious, and that's what's going to help you ask them more questions when they answer. You're going to acknowledge and affirm. You're going to personalize it to something else that they've said or something else that you know about them. That way they know you're listening. And then you're going to ask them another question. And that other question is going to be coming out of the curiosity. And I would say tolerance goes with patience. And if there is a cognitive bias I would be leaning on, remember the 7 factors of unconscious influence? It would be the scarcity one. I'm not going to say scarce. I'm not going to say there's only a few of us, but in your mind, you want to recognize you're only going to have so many customers. And you want to, especially if you're in coaching or as a business owner, you want the best kind of clients in your business. From that standpoint, you can be thinking in terms of scarcity because you don't want everybody who wants to be a client. Some depends, right? Some companies, but if you have an ongoing relationship and you're going to be serving them on an ongoing basis, you want to be a little bit picky. So in your fact finding, you're going to use this mindset to help shift them into their qualifying to you. They're selling you on why they should be a client. You can use it with wording. It's beyond the scope of here, but this is the mindset. There's a cognitive bias from 7 factors of unconscious influence you want to tap into would be the scarcity one. And also I would say consistency is another one because you're helping them break through these barriers when you hear that inconsistency. So consistency would be one. And this also comes up in the final one in the selling. And then reframing and pre-framing. There's an example I've seen done where the person says, I want you to look around the room and everything you see that's green, I want you to identify it in your mind, everything that's green. And they, hurry up now, you got to catch everything. You got 10 seconds, like a timed exercise. And then you ask them, okay, now I want you to name all the things that are blue or red. And the person can't do it. So we've set the frame. But now when I change the frame, now look for the things that are blue. So it's just a quick example of where your focus is. So you tell them where to focus by setting the frame, that's pre-framing, or if they're going down the wrong path, you reframe it. You can reframe by context or by content to get them to look at the thing in a way that makes sense. And this one, I talked about visualization, and we mentioned in visualization, you want to not so much visualize them buying. It's not about making them buy by visualizing. It's about keeping you focused on the right thing. So you want to keep in your mind a picture of them writing the check, or a picture of them, you shaking their hand that this has happened, a picture of you over their shoulder getting them logged in, whatever it is, whatever that visual is, that picture of something that happens after the sale is made. So that's the visualization one. The cognitive bias, I would say, is authority. Not that you're telling them what to do, but you're an expert. You are the authority in this matter. You know more about your product and how it relates to prospects than they do. So you are an authority in that regard, and you have to speak from that standpoint. You have to speak as an authority. You are recommending. You're not asking or begging. You're recommending. This is the way, this is where I suggest you look, and here's the reasons why, whatever it is. I already mentioned consistency. You've got to keep that mindset, and this is where the visualization comes into play, because if the person starts giving you signals that they don't want to buy, it's very easy to fall into this trap of, I may be losing the sale. Well, you could drop into a fixed mindset by flashing that picture of them having bought, shaking the hands, writing the check or whatever. Remember, the mind can really only focus on one thing at a time. We can go back and forth to where it seems like two, but if you make the one thing big enough, then the back and forth is out of it. And then we want to make sure that we're giving them the power of choice. This is autonomy. So power of choice. You're reminding them that they're making a decision and you're there to help them. You're reminding them that it's a choice that they're making, that they're working through this process. Remember, they came to you, I'm simplifying it, because of an ad. And that ad, that headline, led to them clicking. And that click led to them seeing more content. And that content led them to booking the call. So they want this thing. They haven't done it yet because there's internal resistance. You're reminding them that they're making this choice and you're walking them along that path. It's almost like you're a tour guide. Sometimes you have to stop and pause and let them look at some sights and scenery before they can move on. The guideposts are there and you're moving them along. Another thing you have to do is slow down. And this is because they're feeling it. It's an emotional sale. You've got to let them settle into it. The time may seem like it's flying by for you, but it's not for them. This is probably the most they're going to spend thinking about your product or service ever again. And so you have to let them take that time to think about it. And then, of course, part of slowing down is pausing. Make sure you have some pauses in there. You respond. You want to respond, not react. The reaction is coming out of the subconscious, and if you react, remember it's from associations, and if you react, it's very easy to have a reaction that applies to somebody else and not to them. I'm going to now talk about some success practices through the lens of neuroplasticity, and we'll talk about how to take advantage of that practice. What I mean by that is people know these things work, or they've heard about them, goal setting, writing down what's important to you, whatever it is, and yet they don't do it. Journaling, meditating, and they don't do it. They've done it once or twice, but they don't do it all the time. What's interesting is people don't think that it works because it doesn't work all the time. And I use the example in the introduction that oftentimes medications don't work all the time. Supplements don't work all the time, but we still take them. We take them religiously, some people, because they work sometimes. But these success practices, I would say in many cases, they work more consistently than some prescription medication. Just the fact that a prescription medication could have a similar effectiveness rate as a placebo, that tells you something. So we can do a lot just by having the right internal system, which is what makes a placebo work. And then there's also the opposite, the nocebo. So we can have a nocebo that's so strong, that would be, for example, the I don't want power, that keeps us from getting the things that we want. This is why oftentimes people who are successful, they will tell you that it's because of what they're willing to say no to. Just by saying no to the right things, the energy that you're already putting out there can do more for you. What I'm going to cover next, it's out of my 7 fitness areas system. This is where I have the high performance self-coaching. The 7 fitness areas is my roadmap. It's mental, physical, spiritual. That's what we control. Then the emotional, that's the gateway to what we want. And then relationship, professional, financial is how we get there. And this is the be, do, have rather than the have, do, be. This is the roadmap I use for coaches and for when I'm working with somebody, because I have to hit each one of those. I've got to go through the mental, the physical, and the spiritual. Again, that's what we can control. And then the emotional, if we don't get that solved, we can do all the right things, but you can lose everything by a bad reaction. I was just thinking about how Buffett says, you take 20 years to build trust and you could lose it in an instant. So the emotional part is the gateway to the right side, and the right side would be the relationship, professional. And the relationship, professional, and financial are not in our control. You could argue that as a financial trader it is, but just understand there's got to be a buyer and a seller for any financial transaction. But the point being that if we don't control what we can control, how do we expect to show up at our best and to obtain the things that are controlled by somebody else? And that's why the 7 fitness areas framework is like that. Mental, physical, spiritual on the left side, emotional in the middle, relationship, professional, financial on the right side, and it's the be, do, have. It's the making the shift from have, do, be to be, do, have. I like to make the point that people who focus on the have first, they can actually fall into taking the wrong shortcuts. And when you're being, you don't get so attached to the outcome, and you can lean into becoming and getting attached to the journey instead of the outcome. When I first started looking into this, I saw something years ago, and it said that all success literature is aligned with proverbs from the Bible. And it doesn't matter what your faith is this is a different point. And that was interesting to me. I started looking for themes. This goes way, way back, Earl Nightingale days. And then I saw something else that said all success literature is consistent with the Bible. It's the sayings of Confucius, the writings of Buddha, and the Quran. Although law of attraction was created in the late 1800s, it was popularized more so in the 80s and 90s. And this idea of manifestation, and people talk about parallel universes and vibration and attracting, and it makes it very woo-woo. But what I do like to do is collapse the woo-woo gap, because we can't control the mental physical if we think that it's really out there. Through that interest and that curiosity about how all these things can be aligned, and looking across different authors and wanting to see the connection points, it led me to some interesting things. And where I ended that journey is neuroplasticity. So look at some of their often repeated, well-accepted principles through the lens of neuroplasticity and going beyond beliefs. So beliefs are interesting because we have the learned beliefs, which I'll call core beliefs, and the discordant, or the beliefs that were given to us. And we don't even know sometimes why they showed up. And then we have state. Now, state is huge. When beliefs and willpower are not aligned, beliefs are going to win. It's interesting because states can overpower a belief, and a belief can overpower a state. So neither one of those are going to be super dependable either. Habits, depending on the stimulus, if it's a Serengeti tiger level, habits can overpower everything, and that's a survival reaction. And we've seen people freak out. Have you ever seen somebody in a phobia? That is a habitual response to a particular stimulus, and that would be a survival reaction. But it happens when people are driving, it happens when people are speaking, it happens when people are in a sales situation, it happens when people, all kinds of situations can throw somebody into a survival response. And the challenge is that survival response is not usually what is the best action needed at the time, because it's an association from the past, and that past could very well be from age 0 to 7. And then the last one would be mindset. And I already talked about how mindset can be, we can have a growth mindset in one area and a fixed mindset in another area and not even realize it. So mindset is another one of those important ones. These are things that are well accepted. They're commonly spoken about, so you'll know what they are. I'm going to give you what's on the slide. I'll talk about why it works, and then we'll talk about the how to access it. So clarify goals. Define your goals clearly and specifically. The more detailed your intentions, the easier it is to focus your energy on them. Now, by clarifying your goals, what you're doing is excluding other things, and that allows your reticular activating system to focus on that one thing. Most people have experienced setting a goal and then some serendipity happens. Other people might have experienced setting a goal and then some obstacle happens. And both could happen to the same person. You can see now why it might be the predisposition. If the person is predisposed to thinking this goal is very hard, the first thing they might see is obstacles. If a person is thinking this is really easy, the first thing they might see is the serendipity. So what you want to do is, by writing it down and getting really clear and definitive, so you're not confusing, you're not creating a confusing instruction for your reticular activating system. This is going beyond the SMART thing. And SMART goals have a very important place. But when you're talking about a vision, you're not going to have a SMART vision because you're not going to be able to measure it. It's out there, right? It's not measurable. It's probably not realistic. So it may not fit, and it may not have a time date. So it's not going to fit into that SMART, the specific, measurable, aggressive, relevant, time-bound, however you want to do that. You are going to definitive enough about it so that that vision is something that you can see is right there, and it's clear what it's not. I already mentioned sometimes this is important to identify what you're not going to do as what you are going to do. Create vision boards. Compile images, words, and symbols that represent your goals, and create a vision board to regularly remind you of your desires. So this gets also into affirmations, but having a vision board, and I like mind movies. Mind movies is a way that you build pictures and your affirmations, and you put them together, and then you can watch it. I'll put the link in the description. But mind movies is a good way for you to build a vision board on steroids, if you will. But again, what we're doing is telling the subconscious what to look for, telling the reticular activating system what to look for. If you leave the subconscious to its own devices, subconscious is often like a squirrel. It's running here and there, or a puppy, right? And you've got to be able to control it by pre-framing where it should be looking and paying attention to, and that's what the vision board is going to do for you. Again, I like the idea of mind movies, but you can also use pictures, but make sure you look at it every day and make sure they're realistic and update it and spend some time getting involved in it. If it's just becomes something over there that you're thinking is going to just magically somehow come to work, no, you have to engage it. It's almost like a team practices certain drills every single day. Maybe you look at your vision board for a few minutes every single day. Maybe when you meditate, you're visualizing your vision board. You have to actively engage with it to get the benefit from it. Use positive affirmations. Affirmations are also very similar. Now, I do like the idea, don't just come up with affirmations willy-nilly. I like the idea of deciding the behaviors you want to change, come up with the behavior that you want to replace it with, because the subconscious doesn't like a vacuum, it's going to fill it. And since it's biased towards negative and fear, it's going to fill it with another one that's like the first one you're trying to get rid of. So decide what you don't want to do, come up with the behavior that's going to replace it, and then make that your affirmation. But the bigger point here is you're reminding your subconscious, which is then going to use the reticular activating system to filter through to your conscious mind, why this is important. So remember, the conscious mind thinks. The subconscious doesn't. It's just making associations. And you have associations that have happened just by happenstance from your whole life. You have to cut through that noise, and that's what the affirmations are doing. You're cutting through that noise. Maybe you write them down every day, 1 or 2 or 3 of them. I wouldn't write down more than that just because it becomes unsustainable. But you have to cut through all that noise, and that's what you're doing with the affirmations. Cultivate gratitude. Focus on what you're grateful for in your life. Gratitude attracts positivity and shifts your perspective. Like I said, the subconscious focuses on threats. So you have to teach the subconscious to focus more on the positive. And one of the ways of doing that is through what I call a positivity exercise. And you're taking gratitude and going up to the greater positive context. So I use the example, if somebody's on their way to an important meeting and they get a flat, they may focus on all the things that are bad about that flat and how, and they could go down this rabbit hole of woe is me, right? Which just gets worse and worse and worse. But if they train their subconscious to immediately go to the greater positive context, they will avoid a lot of fight or flight. What happens is, so the greater positive context, it could be that I have a car. So at one time I didn't have a car, and now that I do have a car, the car was a goal. So the subconscious learns that, oh, this is part of that greater positive context. It's not a threat. If you don't do that, the flat could be a threat. You can also say, I'm invited to this meeting. I'm fortunate to be invited to this meeting. I may not get there on time, but the greater positive context is that, hey, I'm part of this group that gets to go to this meeting. You're teaching the subconscious not see it as a threat. Now, I'm using these words back and forth. What you're doing is you're literally using drills to train the subconscious to see the greater positive context. The way you do this is every day, 3 times a day, 3 examples per time. So it's 3 reps, 3 sets. And you're coming up with negative things or things that are emotionally negatively charged for you, and immediately going to the greater positive context. So you're associating negative emotion, greater positive context. Negative emotion, greater positive context. I said 3 examples, three times a day, or 3 examples 3 times a day. Those 3 examples, you can literally do them in 90 seconds. I just did that in 30 seconds. I come up with something that's negatively charged, and then right away replace it with the greater positive context. Got a flat, I have a car. I'm late for the meeting, I have a job. And it's the greater positive context. This is not about reframing. It's not about positive mental attitude. It's literally teaching, because you're not thinking. You're training your subconscious to look to the greater positive context. And because it's happening in that quarter of a second, when I talked about the 250 milliseconds, because it's happening in that short space, you avoid going down that fight or flight stressor path. Maintain a positive mindset. Monitor your thoughts and replace negative ones with positive affirmations or constructive alternatives. This is the yet, the power of yet. I can't do it yet. And learning when you slip into a fixed mindset and how to get back to a growth mindset. In some of my talks, I'd say that you've got to get back to a growth mindset instantaneously. You don't have the luxury of wallowing in a fixed mindset because it just gets worse and worse. It's like neurons are like a mob, and the longer you let them go unrestrained, the more you're going to get like neurons, which is just mobbing together. And if you have any survival responses, you can pretty much guess or see that you're in a negative mindset there. So you want to start paying attention to where you're having survival responses and what mindset do you have that's causing that. The other thing we talked about, I don't want power. Sometimes if you're finding yourself, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that, I don't want to do that, that's a fixed mindset in those areas. You've got to get behind that. Again, it's easier with a coach, but you can also ask yourself, what is it about this that's causing me some concern? And write down 3 things. What are the 3 things that can happen if I do this? What are 3 things that might occur? Because what you're trying to unpack there is what caused that self-control mechanism to kick in. Why is that kicking in when you're thinking about selling, for example, that I used when we were doing in the presentation. Practice self-love, develop a strong sense of self-worth and self-love, treat yourself with kindness and respect. It's interesting when you treat people with kindness, when you treat yourself with love, oxytocin is released, and people go through their lives, wishing that they could be loved. And an easy way to experience love is loving others and acting with kindness because the oxytocin is released. The other challenge, though, is that I mentioned we have limiting beliefs that it may not be available to us, that we may be unworthy. And I use a movie theater technique because if you ask yourself, why am I unworthy, you're never going to get there. Why am I unworthy? You're never going to get there, right? It's just a loop. But if you can take yourself into a movie theater and imagine yourself in the projection booth, watching yourself in the movie theater, watching the screen, and go back and run your life from the beginning and looking for when is the first time you felt unworthy? And then what was going on at that time? What was who was around me at that time? What are some of the things I experienced at that time? You're looking to neutralize the references. What you want to do is identify the references. And once you take the references out, the belief will fall. You can't stop the belief from being a belief. But if you can discredit the references, then the belief falls. And that's why that movie theater exercise is helpful, because by going into projection booth, watch yourself on the screen, you're removed twice. Takes you out of the associations. Remember, the associations happen because there's a threat. Well, whatever that unworthy thing happened is like a threat, and the subconscious associations kick in, and that's where we get that kind of a response. Release limiting beliefs. I just talked about that. Identify and challenge those beliefs that hold you back. Replace them with empowering ones. So the first one is to get rid of the references. But if you don't replace it with a new belief, then you're going to slip back into the other one because there's habits. Remember, those neural pathways are wrapped. The neurons are wrapped with myelin, which makes those neural pathways very reliable, strong, fast, and they're just ready to fire, and with some accuracy. And so we have to replace it and then use drills to build in a new belief. But this is all doable. And I mentioned it's measured in weeks and months, not years. 90 days, you can do this if you take the concerted effort. 6 months if you want to drag your feet about it. And you can make it take as long as you want. But if you're willing to put yourself into uncomfortable situations, because none of the threats that you're facing in this kind of work is Serengeti tiger level. It's just discomfort. Facing what you said, I don't want, which in your subconscious may think of it as a Serengeti tiger, but once you unpack it, it's really not a Serengeti tiger, obviously. The other thing is that you may have conflicting desires. You don't want to do this because this means you can't have that, and you're not willing to let that go. So there is some of that work that has to be done as well. But this comes in, again, that movie theater technique will help you there, and it gets you into these limiting beliefs that you may not have been able to spot before. I don't care if you're 30 or 50 or 80, this will work for you, because you're not talking about the mind, you're talking about a subconscious, which is a network of neurons, and the neural pathways, they work for all of us pretty much the same way. So you have to step into it. Set intentional focus, direct your attention towards what you want rather than what you don't want. Energy flows where attention goes. The biggest challenge I see here is that people will look at what they don't want. I use the example of you're running from a tiger. You may look turn around to see the tiger, but you'll see the gap. And because we're biased towards the negative, it probably looks like the gap is closing, and now you're focused on the gap, and your attention's on the gap. The more wherever you focus, the more you get, and then the gap gets smaller and smaller because you're focusing there. Or if you're thinking about debt, the debt gets bigger and bigger because you're focusing in there. And again, if you think about it like neurons, so attention directs the energy. The energy is flowing through the neural pathways. Those neural pathways fire and wire together. You bring in other neurons, and this is how it expands. This is why they say whatever you pay attention to expands. Stay persistent, stay committed to your goals, even in the face of setbacks or challenges. Persistence is key. You know, we've got to look at it like a child learning to ride a bicycle. The first time they get on the bike without training wheels, they probably fall. But they get back up and they do it again. You can use a baby walking as the same thing. And even in school, you know, the first test of the semester, maybe we get a 65, 70, 80, 85. It's not 100. But we don't bail at that point. We hang in there. And there's been many 70s that have turned into, you know, A for the class. And we hang in there. But then when we get into the workplace, because of the way communication happens and the stress and all this and fight or flight and the way people get results and fear motivation, we lock into this. If I don't do it right the first time, I'm out of here. And then that connects to a fixed mindset, and it takes away our ability to grow and develop. So you got to stay committed to your goals. You have to realize that setbacks are part of the learning process and lean into them and keep moving forward. Take aligned action. Take steps towards your goals. Action combined with positive intention accelerates your progress. Similar to the other one, again, the visual I like to use is kids learning to ride, and as teenagers, adults learning to do tricks on a skateboard. They just keep going after it over and over. Practice mindfulness. Stay present in the moment. Mindfulness enhances awareness of your thoughts and helps you shift negative patterns. So mindfulness, as a few ways I like to talk about this. One is meditating makes it easier to get into a mindful state. So meditation is important for that reason. But mindfulness is also that space between reaction and response. If you don't have any mindfulness at all, your response will be your reaction. And then that means you're responding out of the past and you're probably making mistakes. But the power of the present moment, I want to look at three things. I want to look at your consciousness, which is aware that you're aware. So a lot of times you can be aware that you're doing something you don't want to do. You're eating that chocolate cake even though you said you wouldn't, and yet you're doing it anyway. You're aware that you're aware and you're not stopping yourself. So that's awareness of awareness. That's the consciousness. And then you have the mind. You want that clarity of mind. The mind operating without being tired, without being fatigued, without being emotionally compromised. And then you have thought. You're not thinking about regrets of the past or anxiety of the future. So a pure moment of thought, consciousness, and mind is how we have mindfulness, and then you're going to be able to make better decisions. And the way to get into mindfulness is having that response, that pause between reaction and response. And one of the things that you can do is start with 1 minute moments, literally 1 minute moments. You do not need to meditate for 20 minutes at a time. In fact, I believe, and others do as well, that if you meditated 10 times, 1 minute at a time, that's better than a 20-minute meditation session. One of the reasons is that we're meditating not to be good at meditating, we're meditating to be good at life. And a 1 minute moment will get you into mindfulness, which means a pure, powerful present moment. You're being able to access more of the best version of yourself. Surround yourself with positives. Associate with people who support and uplift you. Positive relationships contribute to your overall energy. There's a thing we have called mirror neurons. Now they've been around. We've known about them for a few decades, but in the context of a million-year-old brain, we're still at the infancy. And the scientists are still trying to figure out all of the ifs, ands, and buts about mirror neurons. But one of the things that we know that they do is they enable us to feel what another person is feeling. If I raise my hand and you're looking at me, the same area in your brain lights up in my brain. So my brain lights up to raise my hand, but your brain lights up because you saw my hand get raised even though you didn't raise yours. So there's a lot of that going on. What they also know is that if they take a group of people, and they used this with military cadets. This group had a fitness level. 5 people in the group had a certain fitness level. If they introduced another person into that group who had a higher fitness level, the fitness level tended to stay the same. It might move up slightly. If the person had the same fitness level, then it was pretty much the same as any random groups. But if they had a lower fitness level than the 5, it dropped. So that's a very simple example as to why we want to watch who we're hanging around with. You've heard the other thing is that a person's income matches the average income of their 5 closest friends. So the point is, surround yourself with people who support and uplift you. And you can start with biographies. You can just literally start with reading biographies and starting to see these authors' autobiographies or biographies and seeing the subject as a sort of a mentor, as I think it was Napoleon Hill in Think and Grow Rich talked about looking at having a board of directors, a mastermind. And you can get those masterminds from people who aren't even around anymore by reading their works. Use gratitude journaling. Write down daily things you're grateful for. This practice reinforces your focus on the positive aspects of life. Yeah, no brainer. And then what I would say is add the positivity exercise to it while you're journaling. Do the greater positive context. So it's not just being grateful, it's finding the greater positive context for things that are otherwise unpleasant experiences. Release resistance, let go of doubts and resistance. Trust the process and the timing of your outcomes. This gets back to not getting so attached to the outcome, but getting attached to the journey and allowing the outcome, and it's being able to actually see both at the same time. This is that mental contrasting. It'll come up again when I talk about Stockdale paradox. But we have to be able to look at the goal, but not focus on the gap. It's more focusing on the journey. We're keeping the goal in mind, but the journey, the step by step is what we're focusing on. If you focus on the gap, it can become overwhelming. And this is, again, you don't want to attach to the outcome. Embrace patience. Understand that manifestation takes time. Practice patience and trust that things are unfolding as they should. When I use the word manifestation, I should take that out because I don't mean it in the way that the law of attraction people talk about manifestation, because I think that's often misconstrued into something that has to do with the universe. What I'm talking about is that we're doing the drills the same way. If I had a person doing certain drills in tennis or whatever sport or soccer, I know and they know that if they do this drill for enough time with enough intensity, they're going to get the skill. And that's what I mean by that, having patience, understanding that those drills are going to lead to the right thought processes, the right habits of thought. But we have to recognize that what we're doing is not thinking, we are training our neurons. We're building neural pathways to do the thing that we want. Act as if, behave as if you've already achieved your goals. This creates a resonance with your desired reality. I've learned many, many years ago that it's easier to act yourself into a new way of feeling than to feel yourself into a new way of acting. Think about that. Part of it has to do with the neurons, right? A body at rest tends to stay at rest. A body in motion tends to stay at motion. Remember, energy is what's going through the neural pathways. So you can look to energy for a lot of clues as to why we are the way we are. Just by taking action, you're bringing other neurons into play. This is that whole idea of you don't want to go to the gym, but you put on your gym clothes, you get closer, you get in the car, you start driving to the gym. But once you get there, you're ready. And once you start warming up, once you're warmed up, all the neurons are firing and wiring and you're all on board. It could have happened 2 hours ago if you'd gotten to the gym. So the waiting is not why you got on board. It was the acting that got you on board. And this is repeated over and over and over. Practice random acts of kindness. I talked about this one already, spreading positivity. What you give out comes back to you. But again, that kindness, acting with kindness, releases oxytocin. And when you release oxytocin, that's the love hormone. And when you are feeling love, you're not feeling in need and hungry, and it's easier for you to think about the other person. Foster belief in yourself. Believe that you're deserving and capable of achieving your goals. It's helpful to engage in mindfulness exercises where you ask yourself what skills are not in place yet. I talked about that powerful present moment. You get into mindfulness, and just don't go into mindfulness. Use guided meditations, or ask yourself what capabilities are needed for me to achieve this goal, and what skills are still missing in terms of having those capabilities. You can ask yourself that question and then listen to the answer, and then acknowledge that you've gotten the answer, and then come up at a different time and develop your plans for it. You want to Get away from the subconscious associations when you do this work. Again, it's why coaches help, because they're outside looking in. They're not caught up in your associations, which is why they see things so clearly, and which is why you see things so clearly, and which is why coaches can't always see the things in themselves. It's the same thing. The associations are firing, so you need that external perspective. This is why mastermind communities are good as well. Seek inspiration, read books. I talk about that, listen to podcasts, watch videos. Again, the example being that you are surrounding yourself, you're giving yourself other clues, you're letting your mirror neurons have an example or a role model to follow while you're building your network. Stay open to opportunities, be receptive to unexpected opportunities that may lead you closer to your goals. You have to have the humility that you don't know everything, and by keeping the goal in mind and feeding your reticular activating system with the daily reminders, your subconscious is more likely to notice the assists when they arrive. So this is that serendipity I was talking about. The more you stay focused on your goals, the more opportunities are going to show up. But you can't be reliant on the opportunities in that you're going to take 2 steps and you're expecting the 3rd step to come to you. It's more like ready, fire, aim. You know, when I was in the corporate world, my idea was if I have 80% of the answer or the solution, I have to go forward. As an entrepreneur, it's 60% or 50%, sometimes 40%. If you have 40% of the answer, you have to take forward and you have to move forward and let the blanks fill in as you go and adjust. As we get into more VUCA, I think it's going to be more like 40% and you have to go. Otherwise, you miss the opportunity. So you stay open to the opportunities, be receptive so that when the unexpected ones show up, you see them, and you see them because you're visualizing and because you're staying focused, your vision board, affirmations, etc. Monitor language, use positive and empowering language in your thoughts and conversations. Words shape your reality. It's very difficult when you have a lot of negative self-talk. So you want to pay attention to your self-talk. I would say audit your self-talk for a week. Take a week, audit your self-talk, and group the negative stuff into 3 categories. So you have positive self-talk, do more of that, and then the negative self-talk, group it into 3 categories. Some of the negative self-talk will be the bad things that happened to you that you had nothing to do with at all. That's where you say cancel. It's just, bad thing. You had an accident. Somebody hit you. It has bad emotion attached to it. That's where you're going to say cancel. The mistakes, the things that you had wrong thinking and you made a mistake, you're going to say that's wisdom. I'm grateful for the wisdom. And then the ones that are, you did the best you could, you had the best thinking, but it just didn't turn out right that time. Sometimes it turns out right, sometimes it doesn't. That's where you're going to say life is filled with coin tosses. So those are my words. It's the cancel. I say cancel. It's the thank you for the wisdom. And it's the life is full of coin tosses. And there's going to be more. So this is how you can start to get rid of, because some people have, think about it. You probably have negative self-talk that's been with you for years, if not decades. And it's associations. This happens, the neurons fire and associate. You have to retrain them the same way that a person is going to train a pet. You're going to have to reinforce the behavior that you want. And so when those things come up, you say cancel, and then you replace it with the positive self-talk. Or that's wisdom, I'm grateful for it, or life's full of coin tosses. You don't want to be reminded of this stuff. And this is how you can have pure, powerful present moments. And then we have foster the belief in yourself. Believe that you're deserving and capable of achieving your goals. The Stockdale paradox is worth looking into. This was introduced by Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great. I also heard James Stockdale talk a long time ago. He was the highest ranking prisoner of war. And what he said was the people who didn't survive in those camps were the optimists. He said they were thinking, I'll be home by Christmas, and then Christmas became Easter, and then it became another Christmas. And he said they literally died of a broken heart. The Stockdale paradox is that I know I will prevail, but I also know that this is brutal and it's difficult and it will test me every single day. And it's having both of those things at the same time. If you don't have the two at the same time, you don't have the resilience. If you only have the positive, then you're constantly being let down and by having the two every day, it's like the lion wakes up every day knowing that that lion's got to be faster than the slowest gazelle, and the gazelle wakes up knowing it's got to be faster than the slowest gazelle. And it's having that every day that you're faced with, I know I will prevail, I also know it's going to be hard. And that's that Stockdale paradox, and this is that belief that you have to have in yourself. Reflect and adjust, regularly assess your progress, adjust your strategies, and remain open to refining goals. I think this is where journaling can come into play. It's, setting a new goal as you start getting close to the one that you're currently going after. Recognize you're not just building the obvious skill, you're also building the capability of resilience. So it's who you're becoming. That's back to the be, do, have, not just the have, do, be. And that is it. I went quite fast there because I went way over time. But now what you have is the mental game during the sales presentation. And then the reason I did this last part of the success practices and why they work and what you can do about it is so that you can keep filling the tank. So we're constantly, in my mind, we're constantly in a pre-call, right? If you think about a sports team, they practice for the big game. We don't necessarily have a big game. We have challenges that we're going to face, and we always want to be prepared for those challenges. And that's what this last part was about. So it'll be in my LinkedIn events section for at least 2 weeks. I wanted to also paint the picture that this stuff is within our reach. It's not woo-woo, it's not universe. It's us doing the things that are necessary, because just like muscle memory builds skills that lead to capabilities, it's not muscle memory, it's nervous system memory, which means it can build thoughts and habits and even speaking to build into our capabilities as well. And that sets the stage for us to get back into a dynamic leadership. I took this pause because in dynamic leadership, we're talking about building a high-performance team, and establishing a leadership team is going to cost some money, and selling is a way to raise revenue. So there you go. Next week, we'll pick back up, and I'll probably be talking about vision in the dynamic leadership, that you start with the vision the same way as a person would start with purpose. All right, there you go. I'll talk to you next week.